I'm Maria-Elena Giassi, and this is Currents. The Conscience Amendment may have been tabled, but the contraception battle is far from over.
The government's moving in a direction that would force some Americans to violate their religious beliefs. This is wrong.
A group of women says, not so fast, to the Obama administration. And how much do you know about the mandate?
I've only heard a little about it. I haven't really been paying much attention to it.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Liz Faublas has the night off. Despite the hopes of conscience rights advocates, an amendment aimed at protecting employers from being forced to provide contraception, sterilization, and abortion-inducing drugs in their health plans was tabled yesterday in the Senate. The measure came in response to the recently announced Obama administration mandate requiring most religious groups to include coverage that goes against their beliefs. But as we hear from CNN's Kate Baldwin, the debate shows no signs of ending anytime soon.
Depending on who you talk to on Capitol Hill, the latest battle is about two very different issues. For Democrats, it's about women's access to contraception. For Republicans, religious freedom.
Every step of the way, it seems as if there is an assault on women's reproductive choice and having access to health care.
This is tyranny. It is the political bullying of a religious group in the views of the president's allies, unpopular religious beliefs. And so for political reasons, the religious groups who differ with this are being pushed around.
In the spotlight, a GOP measure aimed at overturning President Obama's controversial contraception rule. Sponsored by Republican Senator Roy Blunt, the move would allow employers to opt out of some health coverage requirements if they object because of religious beliefs or moral convictions.
The government's moving in a direction that would force some Americans to violate their religious beliefs. This is wrong, and we want to stop it.
And especially in an election year, the debate is as much about political messaging as it is about policy.
It would allow any employer to not deny any health service to any American for virtually any reason, not just for religious objections.
Democrats view a fight over contraception and women's rights as a political win, hoping to galvanize women voters. At the same time, Republicans know fighting for religious liberty and against government overreach is popular among their conservative base. And this is not only a political fight in Congress, it's become a defining issue in the presidential race.
My gut reaction would be you stand for the First Amendment. You stand for freedom of religion. You stand for the First Amendment rights.
I don't think we've seen in the history of this country the kind of attack on religious conscience, religious freedom, religious tolerance that we've seen under Barack Obama.
The president's deputy campaign manager says they think they're in a good position on this one, that Republicans, in the campaign's view, have overplayed their hand, and this could hurt them with women voters. On Capitol Hill, though, Republicans insist they'll continue pushing this issue. House Speaker John Boehner would not say, however, how or when the House would move on a similar measure as the one defeated in the Senate.
CNN's Kate Baldwin reporting there. And Bridgeport Bishop William Lowry, who heads the U.S. Bishops' Ad Hoc Committee on Religious Liberty, says the amendment's defeat only impels the church to strengthen its resolve. Bishop Lowry says the need to defend citizens' conscience rights is, quote, the most critical issue before our country right now. He also expressed gratitude to the 48 senators who supported the amendment yesterday. Stay tuned. There's more Currents ahead. A group of prominent women says the Obama administration and Congress does not speak for them on the issue of contraception. We talked with one of the women spearheading the effort to have their voices heard. But first, there's been a lot said about the contraception mandate since it was first announced back in January. But how well do people really understand it? We posed that question to parishioners at Our Lady of Mercy Church in Forest Hills, Queens. Here's what they had to say.
I've only heard a little about it. I haven't really been paying much attention to it.
I've heard a lot about it.
I care a lot about it.
Yes, I have.
I followed it very closely.
Of course. I think in one word you could sum it up as outrageous.
I have heard about it, but I'm not thoroughly read on it though.
It's because you're putting people out of their comfort zones.
I found about it through the media, particularly Fox News.
Yes, I've heard about it, and I'm very upset.
And of course from my local church, Our Lady of Mercy, here in Forest Hills.
I think it's Monsignor who said that everybody's mandated, including the church, to support the mandate of the government.
Welcome back. In the debate over the contraception mandate, many of those advocating for it say it is a matter of women's health. In his speech announcing what was termed as a compromise, President Obama said that, quote, no woman's health should depend on who she is or where she works or how much money she makes. And just yesterday, Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington State said that there is an assault on women's reproductive choice and having access to health care. But a group of prominent women across academic, legal, and other professions say that the Obama administration and Congress do not speak for them. In a statement, they say those invoking women's health on this issue are more than a little mistaken. One of the women spearheading the effort is Helen Alvare, Associate Professor of Law at George Mason University in Virginia. She has worked for the U.S. Bishops' Conference and advised the Vatican on issues including those affecting women, the family, and respect for human life. Alvare decided to bring women together after noting that the first panel testifying before a House committee on the issue was comprised entirely of men. She spoke earlier today with our news director, Ed Wilkinson.
Helen Alvare, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So this hearing, House hearing, was criticized recently because there were 5 men on the panel, and the issues were religious liberty and women's health. And I understand that you've written a very poignant letter about this in reaction to it. Tell me about it.
Yes. Well, thank you. Well, what happened was that I was initially scheduled to testify at that hearing. The committee decided that there were a lot of religious leaders, that they wanted to have the religious leaders speak. But all day during the hearing, I kept getting letters from women by my email saying, hey, you know, where were you? Or, you know, they're lambasting them for not having women. We know we're out here. And I got this idea in the evening to draft a letter from women about the religious liberty aspects and also about the ridiculous claim of the government that it has a monopoly on voices about women's health. Mm-hmm. And I drafted the letter in concert with a friend down the street. We're both making dinner for our kids. Mm-hmm. The next morning, we sent it out to a couple dozen of our friends. By the end of the weekend, we had over 600 women just email-to-email contact signed on. And now, as of today, we're up to about 6,000 women.
So tell us exactly, what does the letter say? What are you objecting to?
We're objecting to the notion that this whole fight over religious liberty is the bishops and other male religious figures against women. Mm-hmm. Frankly, we have thousands of women and so many of them, doctors and nurses, teachers, workers in healthcare institutions, lawyers, who are upset at the government forcing Catholic institutions to do something deeply violating their conscience, number one. Mm-hmm. And number two, it says, don't government, Kathleen Sebelius and Planned Parenthood as allies, dare claim to speak for all women. The number of medical personnel on this is stunning, and what we're saying and they're endorsing is we all know that some contraception has its own side effects. Mm-hmm. We know that some of these things called contraception actually kill embryos, and it's undisputed in the economic and sociological literature that when the government says wide-scale contraception programs for everybody, you get an increase, not a decrease, in non-marital births, unintended pregnancies, and abortion, all of which, frankly, have really made women miserable in the whole sex, dating, and marriage market, mm-hmm. where, sex has become the price of a relationship. I know the New York Post and the New York Daily News have actually covered this economics in some recent stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, how does this issue get captured then by a certain group of people that turns it into a women's right issue, and the religious liberty aspect, which the bishops are trying to get apart, it seems to be not even being heard?
Well, they know they can't win the religious liberty question. The idea of taking institutions which are not only been successful in their own terms, healthcare, education, etc., but have also successfully taken care of more poor people than any other private group in the United States, that have successfully taken care of women who are poor in particular, and women in education more than any group in the United States. The idea of forcing them to violate their conscience, of claiming that all of a sudden the heavens are going to fall and the earth is going to collapse if we don't pay for contraception for people when we never have and the heavens are fine. They know they can't win this on the religious liberty grounds, and so they had to quick shift it to the ridiculous idea that somehow we're not only refusing to pay for contraception, that we actually want to stop it all from legally being available,
And that's not true.
You have to close your jaw and get your act together in response to their lies, because their lies are so broad.
Tell us a little bit about how you reacted to what happened in the Senate yesterday when the Blunt Amendment got tabled, in effect killed by a slim 51-48 vote.
The fight between Democrats and Republicans now, sadly, a lot of it is over sort of these sexual libertinism, right? Sexual expression as a good in itself, having nothing to do with either conceiving children or even building up a long-term relationship between a man and a woman. The Democrats in particular, and honest to God, I'm not political about this. I really am not, and I'm not, I don't get involved in candidates and politics, but what we're seeing now, which is not a perfectly party line vote, but close, except for the three guys on the Democratic side who came our way, is the Democratic Party has to stand for the idea that all sexual expression is extremely valuable, and the government needs to make sure that if a person wants it, it happens. I think this is a sad departure from the better issues of the Democratic Party, particularly where they speak up forcefully, whether it's for the poor or for immigrants. But it's becoming a dividing line between the parties. And just to let you know, the Democrats get an awful lot of their money on the sex issues, from Emily's List, the Planned Parenthood PAC, the NARAL PAC, Move On, and all these groups. They compromise on other things, but oddly enough, not on the idea that sexual expression is valuable, even if unrelated to commitment, union, or children. That seems to be what you're seeing.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it at that. We could talk on and on about this issue. Helen Alvari, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We've posted a link to the statement from women speaking out against the mandate on our Twitter feed. Just log on to Twitter and look for us at Currents NY. And stay tuned, there is more Currents ahead. Prayers for tornado victims in the South and Midwest. We'll have that story and the rest of the day's headlines next. But first, what is the real issue at the center of the contraception controversy? Is it women's health or religious liberty? People at Our Lady of Mercy Church in Forest Hills weigh in.
I think it's definitely about religious liberty because it's not trying to prevent women from getting it, it's about who pays for it.
I think it's women's health. I believe that we should have that, especially when we look at the amount of teen pregnancies.
I think we're talking about both things.
Both of them combined together.
I don't know what how contraception is a health problem. It's not an illness.
My wife also believes in her health care, and I do understand that. So I think it's both.
I guess it would be the religious liberty, because women's health, women can take care of themselves, you know. You have a choice.
Women's health is not the issue. It's the First Amendment being attacked.
Welcome back to Currents. I'm Maria Elena Giassi. Coming up in just a bit, getting down to the basics of the controversial HHS mandate. But first, let's have a look at the rest of the day's headlines. With 3 days to go before Super Tuesday, former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum is hoping for another surge. At a stop in Georgia yesterday, Santorum, a Catholic, called out Mitt Romney on the Contraception Conscience Amendment. In an interview with Ohio News Network, Romney said he was against the amendment. His campaign later reversed their course, saying their candidate was actually for it explaining that the question was asked to Romney in a confusing way. Santorum, though, said his opponent's immediate reaction was telling.
Having a conscience clause exemption used to be something that Democrats and Republicans all agreed to. Now it's not. And when Governor Romney was asked that question, his knee-jerk reaction was, no, I can't be for that. Well, then after his consultants talked to him, and then he came back, oh, I said I didn't understand the question. Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But I tell you, if I was asked a question like that, my gut reaction would be always, my gut reaction would be, you stand for the First Amendment. You stand for freedom of religion. You stand for the First Amendment rights.
10 states will decide their Republican presidential picks this Tuesday. Santorum and Romney are battling it out for the top spot. In other news, the Diocese of Belleville, Illinois, is praying for victims of a deadly tornado. 6 people were killed in Harrisburg, Illinois on Wednesday when a tornado ripped through the city. A spokesman for the Belleville Diocese tells Catholic News Agency that they are praying for the souls of those killed and for the people injured and left homeless. At least a dozen people were killed and at least 100 more injured across the Midwest and South by a series of twisters. From California, the civil trial is set to get underway Monday for a former NASA mission specialist who says he was demoted because of his belief in intelligent design. David Coppedge is suing NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratories, claiming he was demoted after sharing his beliefs on intelligent design with willing coworkers. According to the Alliance Defense Fund, which is representing Coppedge, he was told that coworkers were complaining that he was pushing his religion on them. And could a slain Pakistani government minister be declared a saint? A Scottish cardinal certainly hopes so. According to the UK newspaper, the Catholic Herald, Cardinal Keith O'Brien says the Church should very seriously examine whether Shahbaz Bhatti might be declared a saint. Bhatti, who was a Catholic, was Pakistan's Minister for Minority Affairs. He spoke out against his country's harsh blasphemy laws, which called for the death penalty for anyone found guilty. He was gunned down on March 2nd of last year. And documents showing Pope Pius XII's attention to the persecution of Jews is part of an exhibit of rare Vatican archives in Rome. The items on display include a report from a papal envoy on concentration camp conditions. Also on display, a 1942 letter in which a rabbi thanked Pope Pius for sending clothing, linen, and other aid to the camp. Over the years, Pius has been the target of a vocal criticism by those who claim he did not do enough to help Jews during World War II. Stay tuned. There's more currents ahead. What is truly at the heart of the debate on the contraception mandate? We sit down with Bishop DiMarzio to discuss that. But first, President Obama announced last month that insurance companies and not religious organizations will be required to pay for contraception, sterilization, and abortion-inducing drugs in employee health plans. We asked people at Our Lady of Mercy Church in Forest Hills if that is a fair compromise.
I think it's a fair compromise, yes.
What's supposed to be a compromise is basically the same thing, just paid for in a different way.
No, I don't, because it's the insurance companies that, in the end, will pass the cost on to the church. The church is going to be still responsible for the payment.
When the Catholic Church becomes an employer, the relationship changes. If you employ me, if I employ you, our relationship changes. So I think at then the Catholic Church can have a view on it and make its view known, but I don't know if it should necessarily deny someone their right to choose.
I think that they showed some tolerance and some desire to compromise and collaborate with the religious community by making the provisions that they made.
Finally tonight, we've heard the different arguments over the contraception mandate, that it is either a matter of women's health or all about religious liberty. But does that really get to the heart of the matter? Our news director, Ed Wilkinson, talked about that with our Brooklyn Bishop, Nicholas DiMarzio. It's the subject of this week's Into the Deep.
Bishop, nice to see you again.
Good always to be here.
You had a great week last week. I know we were watching you on
It
television.
was a busy week.
So it was a good time.
Work trip to Rome.
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, you know, before you left, we were stuck in this controversy with the HHS regulations and the Obamacare and trying to force the church to pay for the health plans for employees that would supply sterilization and birth control to people. It's still a controversy here.
Right.
And people have been trying to frame this thing as a women's health issue. Is this a women's health issue, or is this I mean, we come at it from the side of religious liberty, don't we?
Well, certainly it's more basic than religious liberties is conscience. Basically, there is a corporate conscience, the church's conscience, and the conscience of individuals. And really that is inviolate. We cannot force people to do what they believe is wrong. Now, there are certain constraints in the law, but certainly when it comes to things such as matters of life and contraception and abortion, we really cannot violate people's conscience. It is a religious liberty issue, but beneath it all, it is the right of conscience. And that's something protected by the Constitution.
Yeah. People bring up sometimes, they say, well, Catholics don't follow the church teaching on contraception. And I mean, it still is the teaching of the church.
It may be true that they don't follow, but this teaching we didn't invent yesterday.
Right.
There's a wonderful book. It's a history of contraception and the church's attitude towards it by Noonan. It was written right at the beginning of at the end of the Second Vatican Council, when the Holy Father Paul VI issued Humani Vitae, and he goes right back to the Didache, which is the first century of the church, where there's a prohibition on abortion, and traces it from that time all through the centuries, that this was been a constant teaching of the church. In fact, it was a constant teaching even of the Protestants until the 1930s, when they changed their mind about it. But it was all the Christian churches agreed to this. So it's not something that we changed overnight, and it's something that we believe we cannot change, since it is a principle of natural law involved here, that we cannot frustrate what natural processes are.
And a lot of people, I think a lot of people know what the church teaching is. They don't always understand where it's coming from. And one of the problems that we have with some birth control methods is that they are abortifacients, right?
Right. Certainly the morning after pill would be, and that's something that's mandated in this, that's abortifacient. And it's a very fine line, because if today the government can tell us that our conscience is okay, since we're not going to directly provide these things, but through our insurance companies, which we're going to pay for anyhow, well, then why not abortion too? And I think we've got to understand what the church teaches. It's the dignity of the human person. It is an understanding that is centuries old of what the human person is about. Certainly the church does not say that there is no means of regulating birth. Of course there is. There's natural family planning, which has been completely updated in a way that is very, very accurate today. Does not have all of the ill effects that these contraceptives bring. It does demand continence at certain times, but there are natural times when a woman is not fertile, where they can have relations. So the church does not say we have to just have as children as they come. We can plan our families according to natural means. But the fact is, contraceptives are not just used for birth control. Unfortunately today, there are many young people especially that use it because they become promiscuous.
Yeah.
And this is a problem.
Yeah, so what are we going to do? I mean, what's the strategy going to be? Are we going to oppose this thing legislatively? Is that what we're doing at this point?
I think it's certainly, there have been suits put in already about it. Some states have done this, which is very good. So there's, I think, 8 states I read this morning in the paper that have put suits in against this. So that's great. But again, I don't know what the strategy long-term is going to be. Short-term, we need to make our people aware of this violation of human rights on our part, as we see it, and to protest to their legislators that this is something that's unacceptable. And we're going to have to resist to the very end whatever happens, we just cannot allow this to go forward.
Yeah, and we're not going to pay for these plans, right?
Oh, we're not.
Okay. Thank you so much for being
You're
with us.
welcome.
That is all for this edition of Currents. Be sure to visit us online at currentsny.net. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Maria Elena Giassi. Thank you for joining us and have a great night. And we leave you tonight with some final thoughts from the people at Our Lady of Mercy Parish in Forest Hills. When all is said and done, who will win in the battle over contraception coverage?
I think Obama will either have to back down or the courts will overturn it. I imagine. I'm sure it's going to go to the Supreme Court.
I don't know who's going to win the battle right now.
I think it will be passed. I do. Yes, I do.
God willing, we'll work it out, where everybody can live comfortably with their consciences and with their health, etc.
If Catholics get involved, we should definitely win this argument.
I hope the church. I do hope the church